Great. So I think we'll get started. First and foremost, I wanted to thank everyone for coming in on this Thursday night. We are now in week 3 of the September Leader Summit. Previous weeks we had We Are Weavers. Last week we built some things with the We Are Builders group, and this week we are diving into storytelling for a specific purpose. Really excited to have representation from the New York City Slow Food chapter, as well as Slow Food Denver and Slow Food in the Tetons, Melanie, Lilly, and Scott, respectively. Feel free to drop your name and where you're coming in from in the chat. If you haven't seen some of these folks before, introduce yourselves. If you have seen some of these folks before, rekindle those old friendships. But really excited to have you all in here too. What we'll be doing a little bit of the layout for the call today is we'll be starting with Melanie in New York, and we'll be talking for about 10-15 minutes or so. During those talks, feel free to drop any questions you might have in the chat. You can raise your hand as well, and we can get to a handful of questions throughout that talk. But if there are questions that are just overflowing for that specific speaker, we'll save them and we'll hold on to them towards the end of the chat. And we can revisit it in like a 30-minute lobby. So there's about an hour of content. It'll take us to 9 p.m. Eastern time. And then beyond that, we can, it's kind of a free-for-all. We can hang out, we can chat, storytelling or not. Awesome. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce Melanie Schutt. Am I pronouncing your last name correctly?
Scott with a hard C.
Scott.
Yes. Nobody gets it. Don't worry.
Okay. I'm fallible. And would love to hear how the Slow Food New York City chapter tells stories and all the work you do.
Great. Thank you, Dion. And thank you, Slow Food USA, for hosting these sessions and for inviting our chapter to speak. Just a fair warning to everybody, I was diagnosed with COVID yesterday, so I didn't want to cancel, but I am a little bit under the weather. So if I go off camera when you're speaking, I will still be listening, and I will do my best to make sure I'm telling a coherent story. But again, I was really excited to be here and appreciate all of you joining. And I'm also originally from Denver, so excited to be here with the Denver chapter as well. I'm on your email list and always excited to see what you have going on. So again, my name is Melanie. I'm co-chair of the New York City chapter. Been on the board for about 3 years and a longtime member of Slow Food before that. Just to give you some context, I think I'll tell you a little bit of a context of our chapter, and then some things I think we've done well with storytelling, and then I think some lessons we've learned, and some things we're looking to change or do better, and then happy to answer any questions as well. So New York City, obviously biggest city in the country. There's well over 8 million people in the city. Our board is down to about 8 people now. So I like to joke that we each have 1 million people that we're responsible for reaching with our stories. And then the boroughs in New York City are Manhattan, Brooklyn, Bronx, Staten Island, Queens. And within those boroughs, there's so many different communities. Queens alone, there's 110 native languages spoken. I think it's literally like the most diverse place in the planet. Income diversity, we have like some of the poorest zip codes in the entire country statistically, and then some of the wealthiest zip codes. And within each neighborhood, there's just there are just so many different types of communities and people. And just, again, there's like diversity and volume of every kind. So there's a big responsibility there to try to reach as many people as possible, to make our chapter relevant to as many people as possible, to understand the different needs of all the different communities that we serve. So it always, of course, comes down to good, clean fare. But we do get a lot of questions, especially at our events, like, Well, in Italy, it seems like it's more like about eating and drinking. And in the US, it seems like it's more about justice, or people will say like, I used to be invited to all these dinners, and then there were all these things about ancient grains, and like there are a lot of there are a lot of questions about what is our mission and what are the stories, and what people say, well, what are you doing about this community, or what are you doing about this population at our events? They'll ask us directly. So beyond our just board responsibility, we do actually get those questions directly from our members as well. And they actually give us great input on what we can do to better understand what stories they want told, and maybe is there a certain story that maybe we're not talking about enough. So that's the context of the city. Our chapter, one unique thing about our chapter is we do have a garden, a working farm, basically, in a Brooklyn neighborhood called East New York. And that was a city park at one point, and it lay fallow for a long time when the city stopped being able to fund it. And then Slow Food NYC took the garden over. And now we're fully responsible for maintaining it in terms of budget, in terms of operations, and all aspects of keeping it running. So it is a working farm. It's called Ujima Garden, but it's actually a farm, an urban farm. And we donate thousands of pounds of fresh, local, organic produce from the garden to communities. There's a nursing center, a nursing home or senior center called Coretta Scott King Senior Center. That's one of the recipients. There's a pantry, like a community fridge there. And then a lot of different, communities or organizations that may need support at the time. During COVID, it became a food distribution center. So we provide quite a lot of fresh produce to the communities. It's also a teaching garden. So we provide free programming for school children, and large groups of school children come and they learn about, nutrition and eating healthy, but they also learn how food is grown and without pesticides, and the role of bees, and all, they learn about the whole ecosystem, and even about, like not having monoculture and regenerative agriculture. I mean, they learn about all the concepts of it in this like little, bubble of a much larger like sustainable agriculture picture. So that's the teaching garden. So, excuse me. So that's what the garden does. We do, of course, also have snail of approval program. We do a number of events. We do all kind of the other like main tenets of slow food as well. But our funding is, most of it does go to the Ujima garden. It's just, again, because they're solely dependent on us for funding, and that's where like close to 90% of our fundraising goes to keeping that garden running and alive. So how we talk about that is it's like somewhat of a challenge / opportunity for us to be able to talk about this one micro neighborhood in a very large city and make that garden feel relevant to everybody. Most of the millions of people who live in the city are not recipients of the fresh donated produce, nor are they going to the garden to learn about, what's happening there. So we need to tell a story that tells, that makes it clear that this effort benefits the entire city. And one way we do that is talk about, in terms of like the education program, talking about training the next generation. So these are stewards of our slow food mission in the future, and stewards of the environment, and they having them come at young ages to learn about healthy eating, taking care of their own bodies, taking care of the earth, what they can do individually to carry our mission forward. This is something, and these are also, they tend to be, school groups or communities that they wouldn't necessarily have access to this kind of food without the garden. So the neighborhood itself, there is like a very high rate or high percentage of fast food restaurants, like one of the highest percentages in the city. So there's, McDonald's and Kentucky Fried Chicken and all these, Taco Bell, all, on every block. Not as many grocery stores or farmers markets with like the fresh produce. So there's a funny video on our website with a young student who's probably 10 or 11, never, had seen or tried a cucumber before, and he thought it looked funny. So he didn't think he was going to like it. And he said, but I really did. And so, I mean, just that, such a small thing, but like that really, for a 11-year-old boy, that could really shape the direction of, how he eats in the future, realizing that he can eat, something that looks funny coming out of the ground, and he actually really enjoys it, and it's actually good for him. So again, that's one way we talk about the garden, how it's relevant to everybody, is that we're training this new generation that's going to take care of the entire city, and they're going to go off and do things, and having this kind of foundation, and having it be exciting and fun for them to learn about this is one way we talk about it. Another way we talk about it is again, the fair part of good, clean, fair is, it's fair that they should have access to, this community or this neighborhood should have access to having, an organic tomato, as well as a fast food hamburger, that they should be able to have that choice. They should be able to have access. There's also like a certain dignity, like being able for people to be able to just go to the community fridge and just get a head of lettuce or a zucchini out of there and go home and make it, no questions asked, no one judging them that they may be experiencing food insecurity. There's a certain, again, just like a dignity there. So we talk about how having, being able to kind of balance the scales of what's available to this one community actually does have like a ripple effect across the whole city. And again, just kind of does make the fairness aspect a little brighter. And then even just having the garden there, I think we all know studies about, like, when you're around nature, you see like trees or birds, or, you see plants. There are like actual benefits to just even being around it. So even if they're just walking home from work and they just see, look to their right and see the garden there, there's just, I think, just a certain something that it does for the community. And they just have that, that access, again, that they don't have like beach homes and all these, other things where or mountain getaways where they can go to. They're in a very, very urban part of a very urban city. And then they have like a little bit of access to nature. So that's one way we talk about, like, how, again, like, if we're trying to fundraise for donations, and we are, talking about like this one neighborhood, this one community, then people will start to kind of like latch onto it, even though that it's maybe not something that is right in their backyard. They understand that this is much bigger than just one neighborhood in Brooklyn. And it really is, like, again, having this ripple effect across the entire city in a very positive way. So I think that's one thing we've done well, is to be able to talk about like the garden in that way. One of the things that we're looking to do differently is, because the garden takes so much of our like budgeting, and it's the primary thing that we spend money on. I think we've gotten a little bit too close to, like, as I talked about with the board recently, I think we want to make sure we're fundraising to our mission and not just fundraising to our bills. So, we do we get questions like, well, what else? So what about this population? What about this other thing? What about Snail of Approval? What about some more events? And we do want to make sure that when we talk about like donating to the board or being on the board or volunteering, that it's not only about the garden, because sometimes it can just get a little skewed to that's like, we're just garden operators and nothing else. That's what we don't want to have happen. So again, I think we're trying to broaden our message a little bit and make sure that if there's something very specific, like, we're very grateful to have received a Negroni grant by talking specifically for the garden. So then, of course, we talk specifically about what the garden does. But in other cases where it's not a grant and we're just going out to our entire member base, then it's very important that we talk about the entire mission and that we're fundraising,
Yes.
not just for that,
I'm
but
here.
for.
I'm here.
Oh, Sorry, I thought someone was talking to me. Yeah, so that's that. And I think one other important thing that I've learned even more recently is how international our chapter is in terms of our follower base. Some of that's just because people have gone all different directions after COVID. And then, you know, even our LinkedIn like has like, when you look at the statistics, like, I mean, it's all over the place. There's Turkey, there's New York City. I mean, New York City is like only 25% of all our followers on LinkedIn. Like it's bizarre. And we had someone from Sweden come to an event. We had people from Brazil join our Zooms. Like, so I think that's another thing we're starting to look at is like, when we fundraise or when we give messages out, like we actually have more eyeballs on us beyond just our city. And so how we can talk about our city, but we can also talk about just how people can carry out, you know, support New York or carry out good, clean fare in their own lives, even if they're not in the city. So yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
I don't know what
Um,
I'm doing on time, but yeah, just
you're,
cut me
you're
off
great.
whenever.
Willow pointed out that she really appreciates that view on funding where it's like you're not fundraising for the bill, like to just to pay off the bills. Because
Yeah,
you're right, like it could be very easy to do that sort of thing.
right. Yeah, and I think that's what we're trying to change that message a little bit so that it's again for the whole mission and not
Yeah,
our balance sheet.
absolutely. I think one question I had just really quickly, and then we're gonna hop over to Lilly in Denver.
Mhm.
Um, is you touched on the beginning and then a little bit at the back end of people saying like, oh, like what's going on in Italy? They're just focusing on eating and drinking and like enjoying. And the commentary being in the US about food justice. I was curious how do you respond to those questions? Or like to that comment?
Yeah, we actually got that question last week at one of our events. So we point out that the broader slow food mission, although it's good, clean, fair, there also is the joy plus justice sort of, I don't know, tagline or mission as well. And that it really is both. So there may be times, there may be that it's, you know, focused on one more than the other for a certain year, or because there's a certain board member, or because there's a certain thing going on in the world. But ultimately, it really is both joy and justice. And that, you know, again, it may tip one direction sometimes and then go back in the other direction, but it's never either or. It's always both.
Great. Um, thank you for all that insight and the background to New York City, as well as just the sheer amount of breadth and that you're covering with your storytelling and being inclusive of backgrounds and socioeconomic statuses, because New York is absolutely runs the gamut of all of that. So thank
Mm-hmm.
you. If anyone has questions for Melanie, please drop it in the chat. We can revisit it on the back end. And thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Awesome. So next up is Lilly, joining us from Denver, and would love to have you take it away.
All right. Thank you. I have a dog that needs my attention. So if something happens, hopefully my husband will be home soon to give her all the love that she deserves. So thank you so much for having me. I always enjoy working with the Slow Food USA team, and it's just an honor to be able to share Slow Food Denver's story tonight. In talking about kind of the good, clean, and fair, I feel like the element of fair has been really strongly on my radar lately, in terms of just making sure that we're not only taking care of our community, but taking care of our staff, our instructors, and those working the events. So working all of our events. I'm going to be kind of sharing a little bit of our financial story as well. So Slow Food Denver started in 2001, like a lot of chapters, exclusively with volunteers. And in 2013, it was the first time that we really had a staff person who was hired specifically for admin support. And now we're 10 years later, and we are at 3 full-time employees and 1 part-time, as well as a paid intern periodically. I started in January just of this year as the executive director, and that is after being an instructor for our cooking program for the last 5 years. And that cooking program really has shaped so much of our story in terms of how we're funded, and how we've been able to grow to where we are today, to be able to have a staff team, which is really an important element of being able to see the program grow. So starting 5 years ago, there were just a handful of us. And now we're up to about 15 instructors, and we are in about 30 schools in the Denver metro area. And our focus is mostly on Title I schools, which means we're serving around 700 students who are facing food insecurity kind of throughout the metro area. But we also have paid classes, which means that when we're in a school, the families are actually paying to attend those classes as well. And that's another important part of it. In 2018, so our youth education program, we call it Little Sprouts, or our Seed to Plate. Like I said, that in 2018 is when I came on, and that's around the time that program started to really sort of develop and grow from being exclusively a volunteer-led program. And that program was birthed from having community gardens and just the realization that children didn't necessarily know what to do once they were in that harvest stage of it. And so that sort of started this move into the classrooms. Most of our classes are after school programs, but we do go into the classrooms during the day a little bit as well. So in 2020, our youth education director applied for a grant through the city of Denver and was actually denied. And so the following year applied again and received it. And we've been thriving, I would say, on that grant ever since. And it's really allowed kind of this next stage of development of being able to have a paid staff. And our instructors are paid fairly well. It's about $95 per cooking class, which, at 2 to 4 hours of time, depending, is a pretty decent deal, although it is a part-time job. So it is a high turnover gig for us in many ways, in terms of bringing in folks to kind of help out. One thing I wanted to share about our staff is that everyone was contract workers up until last year, just in terms of, if this is something that a chapter is thinking of going into, just knowing that was the direction that we kind of had to be in for quite some time. So now we have competitive wages, health insurance stipends, and other benefits that are pretty important as well. I know we wanted to talk a little bit about grants, so I wanted to I'll share in the chat just kind of where our current breakdown is of what our numbers look like, what percentages. We're pretty heavily grant funded, so I put it in the chat, from government grants. That grant that we get from the city of Denver is called Healthy Food for Denver Kids, and we can ask for up to 50% of our budget. I would say we probably average a little bit less than 50% because you don't really know entirely what your budget is until you're in it and working it. And thankfully, we bring in more money than we predict. So we also receive government grants from the Office of Children's Affairs in Denver as well. And sort of going back to that, the storytelling for grants, funding children and funding food insecurity, it's much easier than asking for funding for overhead costs and things of that nature. And one of the shifts that I know my staff has talked a lot about is that these government grants are starting to open up a lot more allowance for those overhead costs because they actually are a big factor in all of it. and to make sure that a program can sustain over time and isn't just a one-off program that happens, you need to have that kind of consistent overhead funding as well. And so just in the last couple of years, we've been seeing more allowance of helping with like art assistance for our renting our office and other things like that. So kind of the other half is sort of the breakdown of where we see other additional funding streams. And I just wanted to point out how the diversification of funding is really important. And I think as a chapter, it's easy to exclusively go after grants, but to make sure that we're always sort of seeking funding beyond grants is part of the reason that I was hired in, was to make sure that we could start to go beyond. Looking at youth education class fees, those are our paid classes. Foundations are similar to grants in that we often are applying for them. And then the events kind of, if you lump those together, that's about 17.5%. And then we're really starting to look into more individual donations and business donations as well. Those are pretty low percentages, but I feel like there's some possibilities of expanding beyond that as well. I would say the biggest thing too, in addition to how a story is told for seeking funding, is relationship building. And, you know, that's something that I'm really fortunate to come into such a well-established chapter, to be able to kind of pick up a lot of these relationships and start to grow them from my own self. But without this relationship building, and even in applying for grants, we spend a lot of this HFDK is what we call the Healthy Food for Denver Kids. We spend a lot of time, I would say, courting the folks that run that program for the city of Denver, and that they have events constantly. They have partnerships and things, and we're often taking turns as a staff attending these things and just making sure that they know we're really engaged with the program, because it is 50% of our funding. Just this idea of relationship building, it's an essential part of the story to really bring in the funding that you need. So it looks like I see a question. Oh, is that for everybody in general?
Yeah, I think that might be out to the rest of the folks.
Cool.
But I was curious, how, so you see, like, it looks like the youth education class fees are kind of, they bring in a lot, like a consistent income or like revenue stream, let's say. What are like the direct numbers for that? Because you mentioned it's like $95 per class for an instructor. But what are, like, how many students are in? What are the costs for those students?
Yeah, so there's about 12 students per class. And then at $22 per kiddo. Grocery costs, we average probably between $30 and $40. And then just looking at some of the additional overhead costs, it ends up being averaging about $250-ish per class, and about $2,500 per. Our sessions run from 6 to 10 weeks, so we typically say an eight-week course is about $2,000 to $2,500 depending.
That you bring in?
That we would charge. Either it's coming from a grant, so we're getting that money from the grant, like $2,000. It would in particular work if like a corporation recently gave us $2,500, and then we tell them this is the school that you are funding with that grant, and it's an 8-week program, and then we'll let them come and volunteer in the classrooms and things like that as well. So does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay, cool. Let's see. You had kind of asked a little bit about storytelling in terms of outreach and ways we kind of communicate with our community. Certainly, we're big on Instagram, and our newsletters come out monthly. But I would say our events are, and I'm sure a lot of chapters relate to this, but our events are a place of real networking opportunities of, again, being able to tell that story. And it's just that constant, like having the conversation and talking to folks about it. And then I was on TV earlier this week, plugging the cooking class program. And then the other thing, some of you that follow us might have seen with our snail of approval, this, I guess it's been 2 weeks now, we launched a dining passport, which has been a lot of fun because it tells our story within it. It tells the story of our snail of approval recipients. It's coupon book. And we're charging $35 for that. And the other connection we make back is that $35 can help pay for one child to attend one cooking class. And yes, it's a little bit higher than that, but it's all in there. So.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, Angie mentioned when they have more than one snail approval business, absolutely barring the passport idea. That's great. I'm gonna take that note and give it to Mara, because I think that's really awesome. It's a nice way to like aggregate all the businesses and restaurants that are on board. And I don't know, I think as a consumer and like a visitor of restaurants, I think it's, I don't know, to walk away with something is pretty cool.
Yeah, well, and I feel like, especially with those 6 categories in the snail of approval, every single one of our recipients, and they tell a different part of the story of those 6 categories. They're all doing it to a certain extent, right? But like we have the Kamal Heritage Kitchen that is, taking immigrant women and giving them an opportunity to cook. They might not be sourcing the best, but they're actually bringing forward a really incredible conversation around that particular category. And so it redefines all of the categories through the lens of the restaurants themselves. We have mostly the restaurants in there, and then we do talk about all the snail approvals, just the coupons are only really from the restaurants, because brick and mortar is really important for coupons.
Absolutely.
We have little stands.
Thank you. That's such an awesome idea. And if you could, as we transition over to Scott, if you have, I'm not sure if that passport or coupon book is like viewable online or like a link to it.
I can link.
We'll link it in the chat. Lilly, that was awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that perspective of the financial perspective, because I mean, unless we talk about it, I don't think, like, it's harder for us to actually like progress and move to that sort of space. So thank you for sharing like the numbers and the percentages of how Slow Food Denver got to where they are today, and how you tell the stories to get there too.
Thank you.
Awesome. Great. And also thank you to Joe and Angie for dropping in to the chat your experience with working with government grants and like local grants too. Definitely takes a little bit of time to look for them. Grants don't pop up every day. Maybe they do. Maybe I'm not looking in the right spot, but that's the thing. It just takes some time to look for them. Awesome. Well, if you still have any questions for Lilly, drop them in the chat as we transition over to Scott and make our way just a touch more westward in the Tetons.
All right. Hi, everyone. It's awesome to be here. Thanks for the opportunity, and nice to hear from some other chapters. So I'm Scott Steen with Slow Food in the Tetons, and we're here in Jackson, Wyoming, and we're also a chapter that has some staff, and we run a lot of programming. I'll run through quickly kind of what we do, and then I kind of want to show you an example of our newsletter, maybe talk a little bit about that, show you a grant, something funny that happened with one of our grants that I kind of think is some lessons learned there, and then if there's time, this is the last thing I wanted to do. I'll think of it when I get there, right? Anyway, so we are a chapter. We've been around about 15 years, I think, maybe a little bit less. And we have a staff of 5. And we have, in the summer and fall, about 5 part-time employees, and we do we've kind of put our programs into 3 boxes. One of them is this idea of building the bones of a local or community food infrastructure. Something about building local food commerce. So we run a farmers market year round, and we have a farm stand that we run in the summer and fall, where we buy food from providers, and we sell it on behalf of, or we sell it on behalf of them. And then we have an online farmers market, which we run year round. We also do a lot of educational programming, not quite Denver. That's very inspiring. And but we do a number of after school cooking classes that are now online. That was a COVID thing, and people seem to really enjoy cooking in their own kitchens. And so we just kept it going. And we have some adult programs. And then in the summer, we run summer camps, like 4 or 5 week long cooking and farming camps, where kids, we set up an outdoor kitchen. They cook in the outdoor kitchen and get all the ingredients from the garden. So it's pretty cool. It's a fun program. And then finally, we call it just our food access work, trying the fair part of Good, Clean, and Fair. So we run some community gardens. We have about 150 families with garden plots in the area, and we have a grant program as well, where I think this year we gave out $55,000 to 9 local and regional farms. And then we have this thing called the Local Food Discount Program, where we receive some funding to provide a sliding scale payment structure at our online marketplace and farm stand. So somebody can walk up with a box of vegetables and opt into a 50%, 20%, or 10% discount, no questions asked. And it's been pretty amazing program. And then finally, we wrap the year up with this Farm to Fork Festival that we're about to do in a few weeks here, October 6th, 7th, 8th. Here in Jackson, so come on up, and that'll be fun. Okay, so to begin with, let me see if I can share my screen here. Here is a copy of our newsletter. We're looking at Winona right now, everybody.
That's the one. Yep,
Yes,
see it.
Okay,
Got
thank
it.
you. I wanted to make sure I did that right. So yeah, you're just looking at my email, but we one way in which we communicate to our the folks in our network. Well, I'll back up and just say we're pretty darn different from New York and Denver. We're in that we're a small community. It's an outdoor community. A lot of travelers, tourists come to go to the national parks in the area. So they say we're like a 20,000. Our population's around 20,000, but it swells to like 1 million, or a few million in the summer and in the winter, and then it just goes back down in the off season. So there's a lot of very wealthy people here, with second and third homes, but there's also the largest income gap in the entire country here as well. So there's an interesting dynamic going on here. But one thing about living in a small community is that we get a lot of face-to-face opportunities with people in our networks. So one way in which we communicate to everybody is through our newsletter. So I thought I'd just share it. We do this monthly. This is our September newsletter. Every newsletter, we do it through MailChimp. There's lots of ways to do it. I don't think they're the best, but it's what we've always done. And so we just keep doing it, because it's probably harder to, well, we haven't found the time and the energy to jump ship and relearn a new program or a new platform. So this is what it looks like. The top heading is always the same. And some things that we've learned, well, I'll just take you through it real quick. The top heading from the logo down to current and upcoming, that's always kind of looks the same. So there's some consistency there. I'll scroll down. There's sort of what's going on right now. The idea is to just get the word out about all the things that we're doing this month. And so this is all about Farm to Fork Festival, the different events, and we try to go with minimal words and a lot of nice photos, and just click through to what you're wanting to learn more about. So, and then we do some thank yous every month. This year was just to some folks who helped us run a dinner, and then some reminders about ongoing programming. So it's all sort of what's currently happening right now. One more thing that's currently happening. As you can see, those bears are really enjoying those apples. I think they're fermented. So anyway, this is a block party coming up with one of our partners. And so that's what's happening now. We have a Beyond the Tetons section, so happening outside of the Tetons. And some stuff about Slow Food USA here, membership drive. And then we usually do some sort of engaging read along, like a book or something at the end, where we can just kind of reach out to folks with something that we've been interested in recently. And this is this is Winona LeDuc's most recent book, and so we're excited to get the word out about that. And so we just finish with some ways to click through. Of course, you can go to Facebook and Instagram there, and that serves us pretty well. A lot of people subscribe to that. I think we have around 5,000 people who subscribe to that, and they it's working pretty well. We also, of course, use social media, and we have I think around 9,000 followers there. But I'm not that great at social media, so I only pop on it every once in a while. But I know those are the important ways in which we get the words out about like what's happening right now. And then I guess I want to talk about another way that we need to tell our story is through grants. And I know we just touched on that a little bit, but let me click over to a another screen here. Excuse me. Get out of this. Boom. So we wrote a grant for this local food discount program, and I went back and looked at it as I was getting ready for this talk, and I found a nice note on top. It said, "Hey Scott, if you're looking back on this, remember that you and Mary Allen wrote lovely long answers to all these, thinking it was word count instead of letter count. That's why you see both a short and long answer to all these questions. Ding dong, don't make that mistake again." So reading over this, it's this this was a really cool like exercise in taking like the first thing was a brief summary of our request. 250 words is a lot different than 250 letters. So you can see it's several paragraphs where we're just like summarizing as best we can what we want to ask for money for. It's actually kind of 3 things. And then we look back and we got to do it in 2 sentences or 1 sentence. So it was pretty hilarious. So you can see that one thing that we are often always learning with grants is that longer isn't always better. And keeping the language straightforward, always starting with exactly what you're talking about and exactly what you're asking for, what you need, and being very clear with your language has always been extremely helpful. And this editing process is just something that we find ourselves doing, even if we don't have to drop it from word count to letter count. Every time it's like, can you say that with fewer words? Okay, now do it again. And that's been something that we found to be helpful. But at the same time, we still like to keep some colorful language in there. So I think right here, our program, it's just a handful of vendors in a dusty church parking lot with the vision of a market and encourage both connecting between community and local food. So the dusty church parking lot, we still try to keep some of that colorful language in our grants because we want them to stand out. We want people to kind of feel and put themselves into the place of what it was like or what it is like that we're asking them to think about. So there's some that's another thing that I noticed that we didn't remove. And besides that, those were the main things I wanted to share about our grants. Is that most of the grants that we write are for they're for local entities like our community foundation, our conservation district. There's one that to our recycling center. We've applied for 1 or 2 federal grants and never received them. And it seems like with these local grants, the keeping it a little bit personal and the colorful language does help. None of that should ever go into federal grants, it seems like. But if anybody wants a copy of this, you can see how we had to do some serious editing. So that's one thing another thing I wanted to share with you. And then finally, I'll come off share screen here real quick. And a quick story about another way in which we tell our story is for fundraising. And our about a little over half of our funding comes from program generated revenue, which is a nice place to be because it means that we have to raise a lot less money, but we still need, we're finding that more and more each year as we grow, the piece of the pie that includes grants and donations and sponsorships from businesses is growing proportional to our entire operating budget. And so, yeah, we need to bring in some more donors. And so public speaking isn't my favorite thing. I don't know if any of you all love it, but I find myself doing it more and more. And I kind of hit on something at our last event, this dinner. Typically when I do it, when I have to get up and talk about our chapter, like right now or at a dinner, I'll run through our programs like I did, try to give people an idea of a good summary of all the things that we do so they can get their brains around what it's like to, what Slow Food in the Tetons or whatever your chapter is all about. But this last one, I went straight into the personal, and something about it when I spoke about my own personal journey, my own personal food journey, and how it related to where I am today with Slow Food and what we're going to ask for. It was so much more impactful. We got people to do a lot more. They didn't want to know about how many kids we served in the cooking classes as much as they wanted to learn about. Well, here's what I did. It was at a restaurant that I used to work at. And so I first talked about, how I used to work at this restaurant. It was 20 years and there's a lot of material to cover. And so that was it was a good kind of laugh to start it off. And then I talked about my own personal change, my development, my understanding, my consciousness change, and how I understood food, my relationship to food. I basically said that I want to tell a little bit about my food journey from when I was a kid. It was all about food as fuel, to my first change in this journey, this evolution of my understanding of food, was when I learned about food as community. And I told a story about helping to convert a summer camp from an all like Cisco Sodexo kitchen to scratch cooking, working with local farmers, and how that made a huge difference in how this small summer camp interacted with the rest of this rural upstate New York town. And that completely changed everything about that community, and the relationship between the camp, the campers, the farmers, the town, everyone, the hotel owners, everything changed. So I told that story, and then I moved into my second sort of evolution in my food journey, which was about my understanding as food as life, or food as health. And that was about when I joined our Slow Food chapter as a board member. I got involved with a program that worked with folks who had diabetes, and we helped help a handful of people to access some amazing food. And there was some farmers market bucks. It didn't really work that well, but a few people really loved it, and they ended up going to the farmers markets, and we gave out a lot of free food. And the point is, watching real health changes over time was extremely impactful. So that was my food as health thing. And then I moved into this third area of food as love, and I talked about having our child, our first child, I think probably only child, but Oliver. He's 2.5 now, and what it felt like to actually cook food that I'd grown from the garden, or that I'd harvested from hunting, and actually cook that food and make it for him, and like be passing that love on to my son. And so this idea of like food as community, food as life, food as love, I just talked about that for the entire time, and it works so much better than me talking about our programs. And I said at the end, if you want to learn about what we do, here's our annual report. And I held it up, said the numbers back up everything I'm saying. So you're welcome to look at that. But that approach really helped. That was kind of a big aha moment for me. So I'll continue to just lead with personal and lead with things that I really care about.
Yeah, that's incredible. I love that, because I think that leading with personal, and I see like a few head nods in the crowd, it's it connects to people, like if you're talking about specifically about your chapter in front of a bunch of folks, it's something completely foreign, but people can resonate with personal health outcomes. They can resonate with feeding their children. They can resonate with personal growth in that space. And I think that's an awesome approach to not just public speaking, but I think just storytelling in general, whether it's like, yes, in front of a group, it could be just one-to-one on a personal basis to a friend, slow food related or not. I think that's an awesome approach.
Thanks for saying that. I got to slip into a kind of a flow that I'd never felt before in talking to people, and it just helps when it can be personal. So yeah, I agree.
Yeah. People can feel that, like the genuine side of it too. So that's huge. Awesome. Yeah, thank you for sharing that, and as well as the newsletter and the vulnerable paragraph at the lead of a grant, because no one's ever going to get a grant right the first time. So thank you for sharing that. And if anyone has any questions for Scott, please hang out. You can drop them in the chat. You can feel free to come off mute and ask. Got a question from Melanie. Where are you sourcing speaking opportunities? Love the way you structure the talks.
Where am I sourcing speaking opportunities? I guess I don't understand what that means. Like where am I speaking?
Like, are you being invited, or are you reaching out?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yeah.
These are mostly just at events that, like, the last one was at just a fundraising dinner at a farm. But we also have an event coming up, this Farm to Fork Festival. I'll probably get to speak to the audience there before our keynote speaker. So it's usually during our own events that we run. Sometimes there's opportunities to speak to like the Elks Club or some other group that's already pre-formed here, and that happens too sometimes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I want to add a little, well, I'll just say amen to what you talked about with making it personal. And I do that, but what I'm starting to do more, because everyone's tired of me talking about the history of slow food, I now get made fun of it by some of our board members. but bringing in our partners and our board members to tell their stories, because with your journey, you had many different touch points that are the reasons why people come to Slow Food. Whenever I meet new members, they have totally different reasons from the last person as to why they became a Slow Food member or why they were interested in Slow Food. And yours hit on several different ones. But I have my origin story, but we have several other members who are comfortable talking in public who have very different ways that they came. So I think engaging a wide variety of people in telling that when you have speaking opportunities at events is a smart thing to do. And we're going to be incorporating that at an event on Monday.
Awesome. Yeah, it's nice to be able to have these opportunities to practice and to see what works. Not just in front of familiar faces, but also like new faces. It also really depends on what the environment feels like or what the goal of the environment is too. Great. What I'd like to do now is to love to thank our speakers one more time. See if I can get folks back on Spotlight again. Melanie, for some reason, I can't get you back on Spotlight.
My video was off.
I've got everybody pinned, Dion, so everybody's pinned up to the top, so everyone's there.
Super. Awesome. Well, thank you, Dan. I just wanted to say thank you to Dan for being a great tech host. I want to say thank you to Scott, Lilly, and Melanie for sharing your wisdom, your experiences, your stories with us, and also thank you all for listening in and being active, engaged members of week 3 of the September Leader Summit. So give yourselves a round of applause. And so concludes our organized time. If you want to stick around and ask any questions or generally just reconnect with everyone, feel free to do so. We do have one more week of Leader Summit content next week. We'll be focusing on EIJ and as well as hearing from our representative from our Food and Farm Policy Group. Super exciting. We are still in the Farm Bill year. That group has been working super hard, and I will even carve out some time to sign on to a few legislative and show our support on a few things happening in real time. So just want to say thank you again, and yeah, feel free to hang out in this virtual lobby space. And yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Dion. It's good to see everyone here.
Hi, Melanie. I'm up in the Hudson Valley, but I'm from New York City. I've been sending folks your way.
Thank
We
you.
should probably meet. I'm from New York. I took over the Hudson Valley chapter just recently, and we could at some point meet and think about different things we can do.
Yes, I think you contacted us through our general inbox. That was me who responded, even though it's not my name. So
We'll keep trying.
yes. But yes, definitely would love to connect.
Awesome. I also see some folks who I have not seen in a while. Some are new faces to me. Personally, I see Jennifer Sweeney.
Yes, hi. Sorry I signed in late. I'm also in the city chapter with Melanie. So
Oh, sweet.
Oh, great.
Awesome. A good New York contingent.
Yeah, New York in the house.
Scott, I'm really impressed by that newsletter. It's so pretty aesthetically. So I am going to take Brian up on help with that because I think we could get some tips from that.
I didn't do it, but thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, it's nothing like seeing some other examples out in the world to make you see like, oh, okay, well, I could be doing this better. Take what you like.
Julene, it's good to see you here. Calling in from Hawaii. I think you're the furthest furthest away, maybe furthest west.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I came on a little bit late, and then I had texted you about the fact that we had done this great farm to school project over here like 4 years ago, kind of before COVID, and right now we're dealing with the Department of Education that's returning $11 million to the federal government for providing fresh fruits and vegetables to the school lunch program. And it's like the craziest thing we've ever seen. And they've started this whole rhetoric that like the pilot projects were a sham, they were not successful. That's exactly the opposite is true. And I don't know, I think we're gonna have to create a little storm here. But then the rest of you guys got me thinking about like, oh, maybe that's what we need to like generate more members in Hawaii is like take up politics.
Yeah.
Like nothing like a good sort of fight to like get some new members, because I don't know, this is just a crazy thing. I mean, a lot of money, a lot of energy was put into proving that you could serve local food in the school cafeterias. And
awesome. Yeah, it's really nothing. I mean, there are several things that unite people, but one of the good things might be a common enemy.
Doing justice together right there. If the goal is to get fresh foods in the school, that seems like a very compelling fight.
Well, I think like Hawaii, California, maybe Virginia, there was a bunch of states that long ago back in the 50s and 60s, because of the number of military people in that state, a lot of the states formed provisioning agreements with the Department of Defense. And then the Department of Defense was providing all of the food for the school lunch programs or good percentage of it. And so, I mean, that's what happens here in Hawaii. And so it's just an interesting aspect of how some schools get their food.
You work with what you have and see what you can transform it into. If anybody's going to do any lobbying for the Farm Bill, for the final verbiage and so forth, I think one thing that's important to point out is the right now high percentage towards the commodity corn, wheat, rice, cotton, soy support versus local variety of vegetables. Point out the discontinuity in those levels and say that if there was more local fresh stuff available all over, then it would probably lead to a healthier population and so forth. I mean, we certainly do need large volume commodity crops and so forth, but there should be more support towards local. So that's, I would push that. And each elected official should be able to lobby for their own district, their constituents on that point.
Are any of you doing work around the Farm Bill specifically?
I call Debbie Stabenow once in a while, so I mean, I'll do what I can, next week, but that's about it.
Our
other influence if I can.
Our Food and Farm Policy Committee is like getting restructured, and some new energy, some new folks have come on, and we're trying to unpack some good calls to action for chapters to engage in the Farm Bill, because this is like 'tis the season. This is such a huge piece of legislation. Yeah, Brian, thanks for. Is this for the Farm Bill specifically? This link?
It's for a marker bill, which there are a lot of marker bills kind of moving through Congress right now that are they're going to influence what the Farm Bill eventually looks like. But yeah, the Local Food and Farms Act is one of the key sort of slow food style bits of legislation out there that we'll see what happens with it. It's a really complicated picture in DC right now, but yeah, it's very much something that we've supported. And yeah, National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition has been piloting it and contributed to writing it. So Yeah, more to come when there is more to come on the Farm Bill, but it probably will not be anytime soon.
Also point out that, a nation that cares about nutrition of children, should be obvious that this is what good countries do and so forth. So if we're not doing that, there's something wrong. So I think you can get that sort of dig in there as well. Like we're trying to create a healthy population and so forth in so many words. That idea, I think you really want to get across that we need this is a baseline, education, food, clean water, and stuff like that. I mean, they're all work together, but this is one part of it that we should not neglect healthcare.
Yeah, another piece that we're working on slowly is school wellness policy toolkit. Because if schools get USDA money, they're mandated to have a wellness policy in place at the school. I mean, New York City has this at it's at the district level, so it's such a massive system. But each school is actually supposed to have a local wellness policy council, and so we're creating a toolkit with Cynthia Walters to help schools and parents and educators know how to create a policy together that's focused specifically on wellness. So Jillian, I don't know if this would play into your Hawaii fight, but we're working on this now, and it's interesting as I work through my son's school. It's like they don't know what I'm talking about, so it's like starting from scratch on a lot of these conversations. But yeah, so important for nutrition standards to be upheld at the local school levels.
Well, it's a difficult thing because, there's a lot of congressmen who want to see the whole supplemental nutrition part leave the Farm Bill. And it's really complicated how the Farm Bill and those things kind of got blended together. And it's, even it's really hard to articulate, even for the most understanding and educated person to figure out like exactly when all the supplemental nutrition stuff started working into the Farm Bill. And I mean, I think I've mentioned to you before that there's a group called the Sustainable Ag and Food System Funders Forum. And they have one person, and I'll forward you her name because she really is good at breaking it up and describing it. So.
Thanks, Jillian. Yeah, stay tuned for more from the policy committee to chapters.
Yep. Thank you very much. This was really inspirational. Awesome. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Brian. Thank you.
Okay, gotta go. See ya. Bye.
See you, Joe.
Okay, take care, everyone. Have a good night.
Good night. Bye, everyone. I can't unmute you.
Did it work?
Yeah, it did. It did.
Okay, so my keyboard and my mouse died at this same exact time, so I couldn't even